Thank you for staying with us. And now to a very critical topic of discussion, and this is the teenage pregnancy crisis in the country. Now, a survey by the Kenya Health Information System has shown that about 4,000 girls aged 19 years and below were reported pregnant in Machakos County between January 2020 and May 2020. Masinga Sub-County leads with the numbers of documented cases at 705, followed by Athi River at 568. The numbers were equally high in other parts of the country and showed the incidences spiked after schools were closed in March over the coronavirus pandemic. And I just want to give you a scope of the numbers. In Nakuru, for instance, 1,748 cases of teenage pregnancies have been reported. In Kajiado, 1,523 cases. Garissa, 901, and Kericho, 1,006 cases. Now, bear in mind that these numbers are just what we have as of now. They could be higher. And we want to get to the bottom of this. Tonight, your feedback is coming in. We're asking you who is to blame. The president talked tough today, spoke of people having to be held accountable if this continues to happen. Masi Cheruto, you're in Baringo. You're saying parents are to blame because watoto ni kurandaranda. That is translated to children are just roaming around. They have nothing to keep them busy. Somebody here is saying, how will teenagers survive? That's a very big question. They report the abuse to their parents, but their parents choose to keep quiet. So parents are to blame, somebody here is saying. Somebody here is saying the president has all the reason to be irked by escalating pregnancy cases. Let those responsible be taken to account. This is Jomo G. And someone else here saying parents are to blame and parents will get value of teachers. This is Msumi Hoka in Mtwapa. We're going to be talking to the FIDA Executive Director, Anne Ireri. Good evening, Anne. Thank you very much for joining us on Friday night.
Thank you very much, Lillian. A pleasure to be on your show.
Right. Now, on several occasions, Anne, as I had earlier mentioned, parents have been blamed for the increased cases of teenage pregnancies. In your opinion, is the government fulfilling its obligation of protecting and promoting adolescents, first of all, sexual, reproductive and health rights? And what measures has the government put in place to protect children from sexual predators, particularly during this period? So even as the blame game goes on, is the government doing enough to protect our children?
Thank you very much, Lillian. I would start by first lauding His Excellency the President for the very important declaration that he made today. It is timely. We hoped it had come in earlier because we started noticing this problem very early on. If the country recalls, all the way back in March, when the COVID-19 pandemic began, the Honorable Chief Justice did actually allude to the fact that there was a huge surge in the number of sexual offenses being reported to the courts. And at this point, we ought to have heightened our antennae to notice that we are actually staring at a crisis, which, unlike the COVID-19 being pandemic, the sexual offenses crisis in Kenya is endemic. It has been going on for a while. The government and non-state actors have alluded to this. And so we need to look back and question, where did the rain start beating us? Lillian, as you point out, the government has a duty to protect the children, especially in this country. The Constitution has identified children as a vulnerable group. And in response to this, we have quite a substantive legal framework in place. We are looking at the Constitution of Kenya itself. We have the Children Act, and in addition, we have the Sexual Offences Act, which is amongst the most punitive pieces of legislation we have as a country. So then the question would be, if we have this robust legal framework, why do we still have cases being reported?
And let me come in right there, talking about a robust legal framework. Just talking about the perpetrators, it's been said that the biggest impediment in prosecuting these cases is the shortage of advocates handling such matters. Do we need special court sittings to address these particular cases? Because last week, a magistrate actually came out and said that the challenge is in the fact that there's not enough advocates, there's not enough legal aid that would then stand in the gap for these children.
I think for us, Lillian, what we have raised as FIDA, and FIDA is a member of the NCJ, that's the National Council on Administration of Justice, is that the Sexual Offences Act as a legislation is quite hefty in terms of investment. It requires very high levels of investigation. If you look at the nature of sexual offences in terms of the evidentiary burden, there's a lot of investment that is required to ensure we have, for instance, forensic evidence that is presented. And this evidence needs to be presented in a particular manner. And in addition to that, being alive to the reality that for a lot of children, these cases are already very intimidating. We are looking at what is the prevailing environment, not only within the court sittings, but also at the police stations. So because that is where the investigation begins. So for us, I think what we require over and above the specialized courts is for us as a country to invest deliberately in having structures that protect children all the way from reporting. So we assess from the point of response, of medical response, transiting to the law enforcement, which are the police stations, and eventually the chain of justice taking them to the courts. What kind of special provisions have we put in terms of infrastructure, in terms of having specialized courts that perhaps would give these children the secrecy, the privacy, the guarantee that they are able to give their evidence without being intimidated. We have now seen with the COVID-19 pandemic that we can have a virtual way of life. And we want to really laud the Honorable Chief Justice once again that 2 days ago, the courts went virtual. We have now proven that technology is an enabler, especially in terms of justice. So then it's for us as a country to invest, especially in sexual offenses, to have means where children, for instance, can give evidence at one go through video links. Then this evidence is transited to the court systems and the courts are able to administer this. For this to happen, we'd require certain amendments within our laws. We'd require certain investments, not only within the courts, but also at the police stations and even at the hospitals, because you'll find a child probably will open up better to a medical personnel who first attends to them, as opposed to a police officer or the court. So it's for us as a country that we need to invest in that.
But just even talking about this abuse, even before we get to the abuse and reporting it, there are concerns over the fact that some parents are actually ignoring the pleas or the cries of their children. Here's a child coming to a parent and reporting that something happened. So the civic education around when to report abuse, when the evidence will even count as evidence in the first place, and the fact that parents might choose to go to the hospital when it's a little bit too late, or to report these incidents when there's actually no evidence to prove that there was any form of abuse. So in terms of the education and the information around abuse and how to report it, what are your thoughts on that?
A very important and pertinent point, Lillian. For us, we look at it in fourfold. Firstly, as you began the show, you did mention the children themselves. This is a conversation that must be anchored and centered on the rights of the children and involving them. As a country, we've had investment in terms of adolescent health. We do have an adolescent health policy. And over and above that, we have provisions that have been proposed, for instance, in the reproductive health bill, that would allow adolescents to have a safe space to speak about their reproductive and sexual health, for starters, and two, this safe space would allow them to even speak out and point out when violations are taking place. As FIDA, we've engaged with young girls, we've engaged with young boys, and in most instances, you'll find they are scared or intimidated by bringing forth these cases to their guardians or their parents, but they have an easier time speaking to their peers or mentors or even teachers, for instance. So as a society, and going back to the question of who's to blame, that will not help now. As a country, we have to be alive, as His Excellency the President has stated, and face this issue head on and admit we do have a crisis. And in addressing the crisis, case, we must first start by speaking out, allow the young children to have a safe space to speak. The policies, for instance, on adolescent health have created this environment. And over and above that, we can have additional anchorage in legislation such as the Reproductive Health Bill to enable children to speak. That's a first layer. Secondly, Lillian, very importantly, we have to move from reacting to preventing. Prevention is very important. We must have deliberate advocacy, focusing not only on the children, but also on the grown-ups, be they the teachers, the parents themselves, the law enforcement, the administration officers, to ensure that we are able to have the warning signs, that we are able to identify when these offenses are taking place. For now, what we are seeing, and that's largely attributed to the pandemic, is that because of children being at home for these last 4 months, the cases have surged. But as we listen to the Ministry of Education, for instance, there's a possibility that children are going to be home until December or for more months. What measures have we put in place so that we do not have a double or triple number we are reporting come September, come October, but we have been deliberate in preventing these cases. So we need a lot of investment in that, not only by government, but all the stakeholders who are involved.
Well, well said, Anne. And final question. So the sudden surge in reported teen pregnancies is threatening to cut short the pursuit for education by vulnerable girls. So what happens to the readmission of these girls to school? This is a girl who, so the pregnancy will be carried to term, 9 months out of school, another almost 6 months out of school. So in terms of the readmission, how do we deal with that? Because there are many that are currently in this situation. They're out of school. So going forward in terms of readmission, how do we tackle that?
Certainly a very crucial point. Lillian, for us, what we are staring at is an attrition crisis, especially for the young girls. We are looking at a reality when schools reopen that classes could predominantly be occupied by boys, for instance. So what we are calling upon the government, in the same breath that we've seen His Excellency the President really coming strong on the law enforcement and on the administration, is that we also have deliberate policy diffusion, especially by the Ministry of Education, to ensure that policies that speak about girl-child retention in schools, to ensure that we don't have an attrition rate that affects the girls, are deliberately rolled out. As we discuss how to reopen schools, can we have deliberate policies and stakeholders meeting to discuss the issue of ensuring that these girls, who we now have statistics, are able to be supported throughout the pregnancy. Remember, there's attention that they require during this period, and upon delivery, that we are able to actually monitor through statistics that these girls have made their way back to the classrooms and are being supported to still be mothers, but then can still focus on their studies. Because what will be even a bigger crisis is if at the end of the day, exams at national level or classrooms are occupied by boys only, or largely by boys, and that's sadly a reality we are staring at. Yeah.
We thank you so much, Anne Ireri. She is the Executive Director, FEDA, and her take-home, or rather my take-home from my conversation with Anne, is that we as a country need to move from reactive to preventive measures to keep our children safe. Now that this situation is quote-unquote spiraling out of control, as a country, she advises that we need to move from reactive to preventive measures. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we need to keep our children safe from predators. President Uhuru Kenyatta says that any teenage pregnancy that occurs within any particular jurisdiction will be the responsibility in terms of accountability of the area chief, and therefore food for thought there. But parents, at the end of the day, keep your children safe. Talk to your children. Make sure that you are in touch with the activities that your children is getting involved in during this pandemic. We thank you so much for your time this evening. My name is Lillian Muli, and I've been with Yula Nzale. Tonight, we thank you so much for your feedback. We thank you for keeping us company. Remember, every Friday night right here on Citizen TV, the party begins at exactly 10 p.m. We're a little bit late, so it's 10:15 now. I'm handing over to Willis Reburu and DJ Crossfade. It's a show you don't want to miss. Enjoy the rest of your viewing. Stay safe, and God bless. Good night.